Charlton Monsanto. I'm here with some of my colleagues, B. Clausen, Ray Bordonia, and we also have Gordon Barnett from Forrester, who's a Principal Analyst focusing on enterprise architecture. And today what we want to do in this session is essentially talk about enterprise architecture in the age of the customer and how digital architecture and customer engagement are critical disciplines and critical functions that we believe, from our point of view, and also validated by Gordon and his team at Forrester, need to be integrated, need to collaborate, really need to know how they work together to truly create compelling experiences. So as we'll discuss later, participating in omni-channel experiences and designing them is something that, from a product and service perspective, system design decisions are still today made separately throughout the organization. And a lot of our clients are still making engagement and experience decisions at the product, channel, or business unit level without truly looking across the enterprise. This therefore leading to, as customers go from channel to channel or from physical to digital type of channels, it actually ends up in a non-consistent or inconsistent experience for them. Go ahead. So from our perspective, if you look at the next slide, customer experience and enterprise architecture is what we refer to as your digital architecture. And there are essentially 4 key tactics that today we want to talk about and elaborate on later that allow you to do this. And from our perspective, it really requires some time and energy, but it's a good investment given our very customer-centric world today. Number 1, refueling, retooling, reinvigorating, re-energizing, if you will, your enterprise architecture function. If you have one, really retooling and reskilling people, really understand what is customer experience, what is digital engagement, how really are the marketing and sales and commerce and service functions designing their individual channels and the digital and non-digital types of services they're providing. Omni-channel, number 2, really requires, from our perspective, an outside-in thinking business architecture approach. And this is where we believe that enterprise architecture and it truly requiring business architecture as being a formal discipline does require the folks that are thinking about omni-channel and the folks that are thinking about experience overall to integrate things like business capability composition, things like business architecture in general. So they're looking at things from an overall capability perspective. Number 3, formalizing experience architecture, and we will define this later, as a formal enterprise architecture domain, in addition to business architecture, application, technology, and information architecture. Formalizing this to us is critical, and one of the things that we do is help clients with really integrating that as a new function, and if not present, defining it. And number 4, adopting and embracing human-centered design in solutions. As solution architects across different projects of the organization for solutions specifically integrating or pointing to the customer, we are recommending a human-centered design, and we'll essentially talk more about this and then get into more detail. And we're presenting here to you also a poll on who in your organization is accountable for the customer experience. So if you can take some time to look at the answers and give us your answer, we'll talk a little bit about this later as well. So Gordon, if you will, if you want to talk through the agenda, I'm sorry?
The poll's still on.
Is the poll still on?
Give it a few percent.
Okay. Okay. So as people are basically looking at the answers, and Gordon will next talk about the agenda and what we're going through, and we'll talk through customer experience, why it's important, etc. So as you can see on your screen, the majority of you, in terms of customer experience accountability and leading that today, the majority of you are from the product and channel team. Second to that is the chief marketing officer. And third, enterprise architecture and business architecture, which is actually a pretty good result. Thanks for your participation in this poll. So Gordon, if you want to talk through the agenda and take it from here.
Okay. Hi everyone. Thanks for that. We're going to talk for the rest of the webinar in 3 sections. First of all, I'm going to do a bit of ground setting, context setting, so that we all treat CX with the same definition. Then we're going to talk very much about what is the EA's role in that and how can you architect. And then finally, I'll hand over back to LiquidHub to be able to do the positioning of their services against those requirements. Now, the first section that we're going to talk about is what exactly is CX and how did it evolve. So what you will see here is that industry evolves over time. Oh, sorry about this. The mouse is gone. Okay, there has been an evolution of industry from the 1900s through various stages, and this has all been reflected based on the advance of technology. So we've seen manufacturing, which was all about mass production, then the age of distribution when we had globalization and make sure you had distribution in local areas. Then there was a large focus on being able to use information to get competitive advantage. So it's the age of the information. From about 2010 onwards, we've seen this concept of the age of customer. Now this is Forrester's definition of age of customer. So we move on to the next slide. What we, I'm not seeing the, have I been given control? I'm not seeing the, all right. So you may ask, what is the difference between the age of the customer and previously? In the previous versions of the industry, what you actually saw was a pushing out of products to the customer. If you understand Porter's forces, you'll now see that there is a shift where the power is with the customer, and this is all dependent on having a ecosystem where the customer can now define all of their digital products, and businesses now have to be part of that ecosystem. You can ask, does it bring success? Well, if done right, CX does bring success. It not only increases your customer loyalty so that you get revenue growth and you can have cost savings, but you actually find that you can win, retain, and serve your customers considerably better. Now, one of the things you are bound to ask is there any evidence of this? Well, on the next slide, you will actually see it. So in Forrester Research, when we compare industries and the participants in those industries, we can actually see the difference between those organizations that are leaders in CX against those that are laggards. So on the left-hand side, we can see the comparison between Amazon and Walmart. Walmart traditionally be supply chain experts, always looking at logistics for their efficiencies, very little on the customer. Amazon, very customer focused. So as you can see, 27.7% increase in revenue versus Walmart's 2.1. On the right hand side, you're seeing a comparison in the airline industry. Again, Southwest, looking at what is essential for the travel from the customer's perspective. So even on the domestic and the global front, their revenues have significantly increased in comparison to, say, United Airlines. Moving on, you might say that, well, actually, customer experience is a front-end thing. And this is where many CX programs go wrong. If you just concentrate on the front end and you're looking at the interactions with the customer rather than the end-to-end, you are likely to have inferior customer experience. So really there are 8 building blocks that are from end-to-end interactions with your business. So everything from having the needs of your customers, delighting them, looking at their data and doing low-cost marketing through them, the customers being advocates, to actually looking at operational excellence and looking at innovations of speed, automating the end-to-end processes, looking at digital ecosystems, and looking at business models and even the new digital channels that you can introduce. Obviously, if everything in the back end is still paper-based and manual processes, then you are going to slow down the interactions with the customer and have inferior interactions with your customer, have poorer customer experience, which will impact your revenues. Now, when you look at those 2 aspects, you may think that this is just your systems of engagement and systems of record. Well, in this new world, there's actually 4 different types of systems. Right in the middle, you can see systems of records, which are your core processes, your back office functions. The green is showing you the systems of engagement. This is what touches your customers or your stakeholders. But we have 2 other types of systems which are crucial for the enterprise architect to understand. On the right-hand side, you have systems of insight. So this is not just understanding your operational efficiencies and understanding the transactional flow through your systems of engagement. This is actually capturing trends of your behaviors, the emotions and behaviors of your customers, always the market trends. Having that information, gaining insight, and hopefully that will then help you to guide your products and services as you support your customer. On the left-hand side, you can see systems of automation. In the digital world, there's going to be less and less human-to-human interaction. So you can introduce Internet of Things into this category, whereby you're going to get events driven by devices, captured by your system, and some event being processed, and maybe that also gains insight into your systems of record. Now, I'd like to just show you an example of this on the next slide, which is actually showing you systems of engagement and systems of insight. So this is what you would traditionally look at when you are looking at being customer focused. The center of your focus is the customer, as you can see in the middle here. Surrounding that is the customer life cycle. So this is the customer's life cycle as they interact with your organization. So they discover you, they evaluate you through doing exploration, they buy your products, they use your products, they then do services with you, and they engage with you and hopefully be advocates. So that's the customer life cycle as defined by Forrester. There are other versions of this. From a systems of engagement, you're looking at the interactions during each stage of that life cycle, and you are also automating the marketing to those customers during their position within the life cycle. From a systems of insight, you are capturing additional customer data, their behaviors, their emotions, as well as the transactional data. You're doing real-time analytics, and then you are trying to do insights and do predictive analysis, which hopefully will then impact your organization's products and services, and essentially the value proposition to your customer. So this is the level setting. So what we'd like to move on to next is the quick case study from LiquidHub. So if I just move over to that.
Yes, hi. So this is Pete Clausen from LiquidHub. So I thought to make this more real, we could talk about a recent case study where these, the techniques and the theory that we're discussing here was used with one of our clients. This was in the behavioral health industry, specifically a startup business that was creating drug and alcohol recovery centers on the East Coast of the U.S. As everybody knows, there's quite a bit of stigma around this, the treatment of this, and the founders of this company wanted to really change the whole treatment paradigm for this. They want addiction to be treated as a disease. They want it to be treated and classified as a chronic condition, not episodical, so it's a lifelong affliction. And finally, they wanted to leverage new digital technologies to improve the experience, also increase the transparency to family members that are, struggling with this within their family, and also ultimately affect better health outcomes for the addicts that were their customers, if you will. So what we did here with this client is we applied this sort of outside-in thinking. We started with personas. Who will be struggling with this? Is it going to be the mother of a teenage child? Is it going to be the wife or husband of an alcoholic? Kind of trying to understand the personas and what they would need and what they would look for. Then we went into doing journey mapping, all the way from how do they find out that there's a problem, how do they research the topic, how do they find our recovery centers, and so forth. This then led to this drove business architecture and experience architecture, which ultimately influenced the technical architecture, if you will. So just a quick example of, rather than taking a typical process-centric approach to defining requirements from inside out, we started with the patient, if you will, and the family. So before we turn it back to Gordon, we're going to do another quick polling question, I think. All right, are we good?
Gordon, any perspectives on the poll results?
Yeah, it's quite interesting there that you would probably be able to identify who were the laggards and who were the leaders, because in the CX world, you really do need to be more agile, and anybody who's seen agile businesses, there is a lot of collaboration. So you do need all the teams to go together. And I saw there was only about 17% versus those that was only a little or very none whatsoever. So if we just move on now to this next section, what we're going to do is we're going to focus more now on the EA's role in CX. Now, the first question that you may ask is, well, are EAs or is CX a driver for EA teams? So what we've done here on the next slide is we actually show the trends. That actually, it doesn't seem to be moving on. So someone got control? All right. So what you can actually see here, this is every year Forrester does a survey of its clients and asks the EA team specific questions. This question was about what are the top 10 drivers for your EA practice. So this was the answer for enabling or supporting customer experience improvement. So in 2014, only 10% of our clients had a driver for EA to do with customer experience. You can now see in 2016 that it's gone over 30%. So that's almost a trebling of the importance of EA to get involved in CX. Now, when we were talking about omni-channels and what the EA role is in that, what we've actually found is that business architects are using traditional tools and modifying them for CX. So what you see here is the traditional business model canvas as defined by Osterwalder. What you found with Forrester clients, when we are working on CX initiatives, we modify this canvas. And in this modification, so as we click through this, what we will actually see is that the three boxes to the left, doesn't seem to be a build going on here, the three boxes to the left-hand side will become business capabilities, and the products and services are actually introduced on the cost side. So this enables you now to look at this model to say, what is it that the organization must have as business capabilities to enable its services and products to be delivered through channels and relationships to its customers. Now this is the business model canvas, and you will see through the green box there that you actually have to go across the whole of that model, basically to ensure that you are supporting customer experience. So this is a tool that is heavily used now in conjunction with other tools. So business architects are using this. The other thing that they're doing, if we move on, is using double-sided value streams. Now, many people will understand that when you have interactions with your customers, you use the concept of value streams. So how is value delivered to your customer? So if you think of order to cash, you've got a customer who places an order, they then receive a product, and then they pay for it. That is an order to cash, and there is value that is translated through that. As we build up this slide, when you look at the order to cash, initially you'll see the focus is on capturing orders, managing orders, executing orders. We then move on to sending the product or service to the customer, maybe managing inventory, and then we look at capturing the payments and managing our P&L. Now, all of this is inside out and focused on efficiencies. This is how organizations have traditionally looked at their architecture. In a CX world, you have to look at exactly the same value stream, but look at it from the customer side. The customer isn't too much worried about your capturing the orders. They're focused on how easy is it for me to make an order placement. They are interested on receiving goods and tracking the orders, and they are interested in how easy it is in making a payment. And all of this is taking an outside-in focus where you are focusing on the effectiveness in supporting your customers' interactions. This is known as double-sided or two-sided value streams. It's a new technique, but it now focuses the mind on what are the jobs that are being done by the customer. Moving on now, when we look at one of the things that you heard mentioned was about the need to have an enterprise architecture practice. Now, what we have seen is a move away from traditional architecture roles where you have an application architect, a data architect, infrastructure architect, all of the traditional EA roles. And now we're seeing 5 roles which articulate how EA can add value. So we have EA as the definer. This is the person who collaboratively works with the business to help define strategy, whether it be the digital strategy, business strategy, customer experience strategy. It's all about defining the strategy. So the EA is presenting information that is not freely provided by any other resource within the organization. So this can be the assessments of your architecture, operational efficiency, technology trends, and things like that. As you move to the right, you can see the influencer. Sometimes due to politics, culture of the organization, EA is not involved in the defining the strategy, but they influence somebody. So maybe the CIO is part of the strategy table. So they are doing the same role as a definer, but more as an influencer to the CIO, so they have information to define the strategy. Other organizations, strategy is just thrown over the fence to IT and the architects. You need somebody to be able to translate that strategy and produce a architectural roadmap of all of the changes that are going to occur within the organization. So it's not projects, it's architectural components like business services, business capabilities, applications, all the things that are going to change over time to deliver the strategy. Then you have the shaper role, turning the roadmap into an actionable portfolio of projects, controlled by the PMO, but EA working collaboratively with the PMO there to say this is the most effective way to deliver the roadmap. And then you have the executor, which is really your solution architect, the guy who's designing with the end users the customer experience. So these are the new roles that we're seeing that show value being delivered by EA, and they are all working along the strategy to execution. Now, there are certain capabilities that an EA function needs, and there are capabilities that you have to do a maturity assessment on, and you should have a stakeholder view and the enterprise architect's view. This example is specifically for business architects, but you can see on the left-hand side there, these are the standard key high-level capabilities that an enterprise architecture practice needs, being able to do R&D, innovation management, portfolio governance, solution guidance, all of these. Every one of these requires different skills. The most important one is that one down at the bottom, which goes back to the collaboration. EAs should not be siloed, going off and trying to architect. There must be business context, and therefore you need to have engagement with your stakeholders. What you should also do is, on the next slide, we see the maturity of your EA practice. You should always be looking to evolve, because the EA practice that you have today may not be the EA practice that you need in the future. So if we look at those 5 roles I just discussed, you may be working as a translator due to the maturity of your organization. But as you move forward in the future, there may be more benefit that you're working as an influencer or a definer. So what you're looking at here is your organizational maturity. Is your EA discipline using the right subject matter experts? Are you producing the right artifacts with the right context to the right stakeholders at the right time? Is it of value to them? Have you built the right relationships? So this is where you may be working with customers, with your internal customers, your business executives, PMO, audit, etc. And then what are your processes like? Are you doing it sequentially waterfall? Should you be going into more lean and agile? So this is the way that you look at maturity. Now, when we move on to the next subjects, what we're really looking at is the human-centered aspects. And what we find from a lot of CX agencies is they talk about service blueprints. So they always start from the customer journey. And what you find from the advanced leading organizations on CX that heavily use EA, the first thing that they do is they identify the services that are delivered to the customer to help them complete their jobs. What you then do is you look at the activities that you need to perform internally to satisfy the delivery of that service to the customer. Then you map on the business capabilities, looking at your core capabilities, then your enabling capabilities, and then your support capabilities. Everything in this model that you see here is identifying what you need rather than how you do it. And the biggest mistake that we see from EA practices is they jump to solutions. They will look at a certain point of the journey map and go, oh, we need to put this on the website. So straight away they go to the solution and they do not look end to end of the journey map. So you find that most CX organizations have a series of repair initiatives rather than a CX strategy. Other things that we see is a modification of the right-hand side of that business model canvas. So if we look on the left-hand side here, you can see the green boxes, capabilities. And in a capability is an aggregation of process, information, technology, and people with the offering. That's pretty consistent with the business model canvas. Everything on the right-hand side is now taking the business model value proposition, the relationships, channels, and customers, and changing it to CX language. Rather than talking about customer segments, you tend to find they use the language personas. They use journeys and contexts and touch points rather than the terms, channels, and things like that. And everything's from the customer's objectives. It is the customer that determines whether it's valuable, not the organization. So this is known as a service blueprint or a service proposition canvas. On the next slide, what we're actually going to talk about, this is known as a value proposition canvas, and this is used heavily by product managers. However, 9 times out of 10, when you ask a product manager to explain this model to you, they start from the left-hand side, which is about the products and services that they provide, and then they talk about the features that provide gains or the features that relieve pains for a customer. Now, this was actually created by software engineers in the 80s, and this is called voice of the customer. So you actually should start from the right-hand side. The whole idea is that you understand what it is that your customers are trying to achieve. What are their customer jobs? You then identify what is in their doing that job, what is easy for them and what is hard. And this is known as the gains and pains. Once you have this from the customer's point of view, you are then in a better position to say, how do my products align with those gains and pains? So this is known as the value proposition canvas. And all of this is human-centered design, looking at things from the customer's point of view. And we've just nicely now gone on to the next section where we'll now be handing over to LiquidHub.
We have a poll starting. Okay. Hello, folks. This is Charles Monsanto again. And as you can see, we have a quick poll again that we'd like you to participate on. If you have any insight into how or whether your customer experience delivery and managing has any type of inhibitors or any issues that allow you to be effective there, we'd like to know. Okay. Interesting. So the biggest issue we're seeing here is that inconsistent motives or reasons for doing customer experience across the corporate functions, which is, again, very consistent with our point of view that we see at our clients product or channel or business function specific differences in how they manage customer experience. And this really is where we think that enterprise architecture, or the next generation of enterprise architects, can play that role of facilitating and integrating across the different lines of business, across the different functions. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about how we can expand enterprise architecture to include customer experience. So the graphic here really sets things up contextually in that the notion of persona identification, persona management, understanding truly the different types of users and context and cultural backdrops is critical. Using techniques such as journey mapping. And again, understanding through each of the different touch points, how are they feeling throughout each one of these experiences, and how these moments affect whether or not they want to buy, whether or not you're able to retain them, whether or not you need to do different types of engagement is critical. Understanding all of this is very critical, and not a traditional enterprise architecture skill set, right? Digital engagement and integration platforms, from an enterprise architecture perspective, coming up with reference architectures and being able to apply that then to customer experience is something new. It's something that we are, from our point of view, is critical to be integrated within your organization. So if you think about engagement and the life cycle through which all the different types of phases one goes through in managing customer experience, and how you plan different activities around that. Our thought here is that traditional enterprise architecture has to somehow evolve to understand and design, help design for all types of customer engagement throughout the whole life cycle. There are many different types of depictions of customer engagement life cycles. In our case, we do have 8 different phases, from designing, architecting, integrating, using insights and analytics, managing the process, and therefore also measuring what works, what doesn't work, to optimize planning and design. So what you see here are some sample questions of how enterprise architects, in collaborating and working with your marketing, sales, service types of functions, questions you can ask in terms of how do you design for compelling customer experience, how do you apply good digital architecture and enterprise architecture, right, to leverage existing content repositories, existing integration type capabilities, existing data management capabilities the right way, and hopefully not doing them different by each different business unit. In terms of the digital solutions, how do we think about platforms rather than point-to-point types of integration capabilities? So what we're trying to say here is that the different roles that Gordon was talking about before, where we're moving away from domain-centric types of roles and more integrator, influencer, people that can really work with teams and provide insight across all the different products, all the different business capabilities. It's a critical new evolution for enterprise architects. Looking at this from the notion of what are the right systems of insight, the right systems of record, if you will, for data, right, so that we're not going through different channels and experiencing different types of information about us, or being asked multiple times to provide the same information. We've all gone through that experience. Those are all things that, from an EA perspective and the evolution of that EA role, we believe adopting a customer engagement lifecycle type mentality is critical. The reality that we see is, unfortunately, that enterprise architecture tends to only get involved in maybe 2 to 3 of the different of the 8 stages that you see on the right specifically. The traditional point where enterprise architects become involved are around architecture, some designing, integration typically, and a little bit of insight. Go ahead, please. So back to the 4 tactics that we believe are important for us to assess. We're going to elaborate a little bit on this. But from our perspective, again, customer engagement and compelling experiences and how you help design that as an enterprise architect requires that, again, you reach out, you integrate, you collaborate, and formalize how you manage what we call a digital architecture. And this digital architecture being essentially invested in and designed with a lot of input, of course, from the servicing, sales, and marketing organizations. Please. So let's talk a little bit about refueling and retooling your EA function. So in case you have an EA function, we really believe that there are new things that can be done to reinvigorate and re-energize the function, and thinking about the next generation of the EA role. And if you don't have it, of course, what we really subscribe to is starting one as soon as possible, and creating a charter and a way of investing in that really has a set of metrics, customer engagement, customer experience, etc. Alignment, of course, with the front office type of services across sales, marketing, loyalty management, and service are critical areas where we think that from an executive buy-in perspective, leaders in the organization from a top-down perspective have to adopt this type of thinking. The multidisciplinary types of skill sets, again, that are necessary across different domains, not just your traditional business, technology, application, and technology domains, but experience-centric type of domains are critical to look at it from a holistic perspective. So retraining, educating, and again, looking at things from the outside-in perspective is a critical new domain that we are recommending that enterprise architects, if you have the function and if you're building a new one, that become a formal part of that group. So in one of our recent case studies, we worked with a global manufacturer, and we went in and validated that they had issues with solution design governance, doing things consistently across different project teams, different locations. We identified that from a customer data perspective, of course, as with many organizations out there, data management was an issue, and their request to us was to build a so-called modern architecture, help them build for the future, help them include things such as cloud and virtual data management, etc. And we helped them mobilize also a new enterprise architecture function within one of their larger divisions. We developed customized enterprise architecture and solution architecture playbooks, and also introduced the notion of a digital engagement platform. And on the right-hand side, you see the typical reference models that, as architects, we build. In this case, the key gaps in red were around information and insight capabilities, technical capabilities and platforms, and the ability for doing integration. So in the effort to integrate and facilitate the business to also appreciate the importance of investing, corporate functions, of investing in these capabilities, we recommended to visualize a notion of a digital engagement platform. Because they realized that everything was really about the experience and the complexity that customers and the distribution channel was having in ordering products or getting status in orders. So number two, again, the omni-channel design and the requirement from our perspective of applying traditional and new business architecture methods. We believe that this is a critical part of CX or experience strategy and enterprise architecture. And it becomes we'll call it lingua franca, the common language of how enterprise architects and business unit leaders can talk to each other. Methods such as doing business capability decomposition, value stream analysis, and then applying these again across all of the different business units that are customer facing to us is a critical part of the strategy. So in addition to the four typical domain areas of enterprise architecture, from business, application, data, and technology, what we recommend that from a framework perspective is to add a fifth formal domain around experience architecture. And while this has in the industry different types of definitions, our definition on this is really where we focus on things such as research, truly applying human-centered design on research and understanding the customer or user, applying things such as ethnographic studies, which are essentially different than the traditional business analysis and requirements management methods. We really recommend increasing or applying the skill sets around user design, usability design, usability testing to come up with a great understanding of, or a better understanding of the user. The key domains, and if you can actually go to the next slide. If you look at the breakouts here, on the left-hand side, this is what we call a traditional reference architecture from business, experience, platforms, and data, and technology at the bottom. And the breakout on the right is how we define the different capabilities that you need across the experience architecture function. So again, research, strategy, user experience, creative, and content. And within each one of these, again, specific capabilities that not necessarily need to become core skill sets in your enterprise architecture team, become things that people understand, your team understands, is able to work with in your design, your marketing, and your sales teams. So within each of these, again, adopting and embracing human-centered design is a critical skill set. And there's a lot of course, a lot of content and materials on human-centered design. And we do have a lot of this material as part of our one of our practices. But to us, this essentially becomes for solution architecture teams and teams that are working within different projects. The point at which solution teams and solution architects become confident and willing to work with and collaborate with folks that really are looking at immersing themselves in the user and the user's context and understanding at each touch point what the experience is that they're requiring or makes it compelling, what the experience is that keeps them engaged at that moment, and how you measure that, right? All centered around the human design from us from our perspective, is a critical new role and a critical new skill set to apply to enterprise architecture. So as part of our capabilities, we came up with 10 different principles on experience management. And these are principles that from an enterprise architecture perspective, we recommend enterprise architects start to learn about, to embrace, and to apply, and again, work with the customer experience teams to better understand, but to also help them be at the front set of a project rather than at the end. So just to elaborate on just from a time perspective, we'll go to number 4. And the lessons learned here really is that experiences are very discrete. Each moment of interaction at any time, whether it's an app or walking into a lobby, you can have a great application, or you can have a great app on your mobile device that you've designed and spend a lot of dollars on. However, if the data, for example, for having scheduled a meeting with an advisor, and that same data is different than the data for scheduling when you walk into the lobby physically, if that's different, it becomes a frustrating and unsatisfactory moment. And in terms of how that applies to the overall experience, is therefore negative. When you look at number 10, the emotional responses at each interaction, again, from an enterprise architecture perspective, being able to measure these and therefore also balancing corporate and business-specific metrics, right? Not just looking at the emotional aspect of experience, but also at some of the specific metrics around click-through rates, customer acquisition rates, the frequency of visits, purchase frequency, time on the site. These are critical metrics then that as an enterprise architect, we then have to balance and then advocate for across the different types of product lines and business units. So then in terms of traditional enterprise architecture principles and how these can then evolve. So these are 10 different principles that we've come up with. And again, we can go through all these different 10 principles. It would take us a couple hours. So let's focus on number 1, which ends up being the most frustrating source of issues for experience, and that's data. And the fact that governance of data and having data sources of record being applied at the right time, the right context, is one of the bigger issues, of course. So companies that have enterprise architecture functions where data management, data architecture is unfortunately, in a lot of our experience, separate from data or informatics departments, tend to have a lot of issues around this. So in terms of an architecture principle, we advocate very much for integrating data management, especially, of course, data that is customer-facing, that the customer interacts with both physically and digitally, needs to be integrated. So number 6, the decisioning rights and understanding your portfolio of projects. Any of the projects that for your next time frame of the portfolio touch the customer, and then being able to work with these different project teams and being at the present at the table at the beginning of the project rather than at the end, just to validate certain standards, is an important skill set. So working with the PMO, if there is such a thing in your organization, is critical to understand which projects are specifically customer-facing, customer-engaging types of projects, and then bringing in the new domains that we are advocating for, such as experience architecture. So in terms of number 10, the principle there that we also, of course, everyone knows about, it's all about the people. And having the right people with the right disposition, the right capabilities of influencing and advising and consulting, and having investments done in training, but also leveraging folks that can work with in your organization, the chief digital officer, if there is one, or the business relationship management across different brands or different business units, are critical capabilities, of course, that are necessary. In our experience, we tend to find a lot of enterprise architecture teams where they're seen as very smart technical people and have a lot of insight into technical design. However, that no longer is enough for this day and age. So we do advocate for and recommend for adding to your enterprise architecture team people that can not just be technically oriented, but also appreciate the nuances of experience management, human-centered design, and are able to collaborate at the executive level with folks from your business relationship management and brand management functions. So if we pull this all together, and Gordon, if you have any insights here and want to add, please let us know. But again, in terms of where we are today, with all things being customer-centric, to remain relevant, enterprise architects really do have to invest and change their capabilities to become more collaborative and integrate with sponsors of marketing, service, sales, and commerce types of teams, all the front office, customer-touching types of capabilities. That evolution, from our perspective, is critically necessary, and we have encountered clients where this is not happening fast enough, and therefore we're seeing EA become more of a, okay, let's just make sure that the team is okay with some of the design at the end rather than being at the table at the beginning and throughout the whole customer life cycle. Number two, again, is again repeating the need for formalizing the notion of a experience architecture as a capability and domain, in addition to the four typical domains of enterprise architecture. And in that capability, having folks that are able to effectively evangelize this across different business units, different project teams, being willing to be present at the right time, the right place, we believe that this is a true immediate next step that is critical. So, and in fact, this is not necessarily an individual type of thing for individual members of the enterprise team. It truly is something that we recommend becoming an integrated capability across all the different domain areas within EA. So number three, and this is really where the rubber meets the road when project solution architects are able to confidently promote and bring in human-centered design types of principles when they're doing design. This is, again, from our experience, we see this lacking in a lot of different projects. And as an organization ourselves, as we design and build solutions for our clients, we do now add that as a skill set to our project teams, which is something that in the past was not done. So this is for us a new thing as well. And folks with human-centered design types of capabilities are critical now as part of our project pods. Gordon, not sure if you have any thoughts or additional insight here?
No, I think this is very good, and that is something that we see a lot. I think your number one is probably the most important one there about evolving the capabilities. It's understanding the what before you get to the how, and that's probably the biggest challenge for EAs and the business as well.
Thank you. Okay. So we have essentially some time. I guess we have 8 minutes at this point to do some questions from the audience. Any questions so far? Okay, so one of the questions that we have is, how is all of this different from traditional business architecture? So I guess this being, if they already have business architecture, how would we actually adjust it and how do we make it different to make this effective?
Yeah, so this is Pete from LiquidHub. I can take that question. So, I mean, you could argue that this has always been part of what Zachman envisioned enterprise architecture to be. Some purists may argue that what we're talking about here traditionally lived in the bottom of the business architecture layer or the very top of application architecture. What we feel is different, however, is sort of the importance of this, the emergence of new technologies that makes all this real finally, right? The cloud, the digital, the ubiquitous kind of connectivity that we all have. And then also the changing demographics of our customers. Like the digital natives is just one, but I mean, my mother is on email, she's shopping on her phone, all of this stuff. The experience is so much more important now because there's so many more channels conflicting for priorities with customers, so that need to take it from an outside-in approach just really bubbles this to the forefront, and it really needs to be its own discipline within the sort of science of enterprise architecture. I think that's what's different to us. It's not traditional process-centric, inside-out thinking of making the best systems and then launching it and seeing the customers interact with it. This is working with the customer to define the system and the experience.
Okay, thank you. I hope that answered that question. Second question we have is, what advice would you give an EA team to get started with this? In that case, we would recommend that this is very much a top-down type of initiative. Enterprise architecture in general is really all out about influencing and having the ability to participate, collaborate, but very much influence decisioning and being able to work effectively with teams that are multidisciplinary. So in terms of starting, the building of a charter, an enterprise architecture charter, and a business case, and having this be something that is embraced by the executive team across all of the, not all, but most critical business units or products and channels, and also the CIO, very important. And if you have one, a chief digital officer, it's critical. So creating an executive, call it charter document, that you can then have these folks buy into, and then from there create the right business model, the right capability and operating model for the team is a critical next step. Okay, so from another question that we have here is, what are the typical barriers that EA teams have to overcome when implementing experience architecture? So Gordon, if you're okay with us passing that question on to you,
yeah,
any thoughts
sure.
on that one?
Yeah. There's a number of things that we've found. Typical barriers are the culture of the organization preventing people from collaborating, and sometimes it's not the organization, it's the EA team themselves. The EA do not have the confidence of their relationships with their stakeholders like the business. So building that collaboration is crucial to actually getting an experience architecture actually defines that offers a value. The other thing that's really crucial is many EA teams are perceived to be IT, and they're on the delivery side of the organization. So they are very quick to jump to solution architecture rather than to actually look at the end-to-end architecture, which is of benefit to the organization. Now, some of that, again, goes back to culture, that the business demand that of EA, but EA have to stand back and look at the bigger picture. And then I'd say probably the final one as a major barrier is that EAs in particular are the people that dot the I's and cross the T's. They are used to going into detail and making sure everything is right. In the CX world, where everything's got to be quicker, there's got to be a lot more focus on conceptual design, using design thinking and storyboards, all of the tools that the business are very good at, whereas architects are not particularly very good at that. So they like to really get their boxes and the little artifacts. So I would throw away the traditional EA approaches and work with the business to build conceptual storyboards of what's actually going to happen.
Yeah, what I would also add to that one, Gordon, is, again, effectively working with and getting buy-in from, if it exists, the Chief Digital Officer role, and hopefully having that role be someone that evangelizes and then makes sure that EA is part of some of the strategy and planning activities across the enterprise.
Yeah, that's an interesting one, because in many organizations that are Forrester clients, they don't have that role, CDO. So a CDO usually evolves when your CMO, your Chief Marketing Officer, and CIO together cannot basically introduce a digital organization. So you bring in this subject matter expert called a CDO. But yeah, I would agree, whether that is a dual role or a single role, you need that buy-in.
Yeah. So in terms of, I think we'll make this the last question that we have here. Actually, Gordon, any EA tools that you know today are capturing some of these customer experience type principles that we've talked about?
Yeah, 2 years ago, I did a wave, which is actually an evaluation of all of the EA tools, and one of the critical criteria was how the tool helped EAs capture CX principles, the journey maps and things like that. Over the last 2 years, the number of EA tools who are capturing journey maps has accelerated. It's quite large now. So of the 60 vendors, I think you're probably at about 30 or 40% of the EA tools support it. Many of them very superficially they are not of the level that you would expect to find in a CX design agency or a consultancy that has built their own models, but they get in there.
Okay. Gordon, thank you for that answer. And we are at the top of the hour here. So with that, we wanted to end this session, and hopefully it was of value to everyone. Gordon, thanks again for partnering with us in presenting this. And everyone, if you do have questions, please send them to info@liquidhub.com, and we'll be responding to them very quickly. This is a very strategic capability for us and a major focus for our firm. So thank you, everyone, again. And this was, by the way, recorded and will be available. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Thanks.